I think that's possible. And of course, we're not going to be alive to test that idea.
Maybe we will. Maybe with CRISPR and all this crazy shit that's coming down the line.
No, come on, Joe.
So?
There's nothing's going to happen. The pace of innovation, people always have been saying, if you go back every decade, people saying, just around the corner, just around the corner. These things take forever. They're very hard. Biological systems are very hard to engineer. Of course, the people who do that kind of work will often, I think a lot of them engage in snake oil. They want to fund their research.
Sure, but I think it's entirely possible that there's a 20-year-old listening to this podcast.
Who will be 150.
Right now.
Yes, that's possible.
Maybe a lot more than that. I think it's entirely possible that 30-year-olds today could be 150. But I think you give another 10 years of research, you give maybe 10 years more, I think it's entirely possible.
Well, there's a famous bet about this, you may know, like the Olshansky-Alstad bet.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yes, where they bet that about 10 or 20 years ago, they bet that there was a person born that year who would live to be 150. And on one side, you had one guy who said, no, they bet $1 billion, and they endowed it with they opened up a bank account. They put in, they're using compound interest to get to that sum of money, and they obliged
fucking nerds.
Yes, and they obliged their
what a great bet.
Yes, and they designated the National Academy of Sciences or some entity like that would adjudicate the bet in 150 years, and then they specified the kinds of documentation that might be needed, and they allowed for, in the future, there may be other ways of ascertaining how old someone is, and those can be used, and that's the bet. So you might be right about that. Like, there are humans that live naturally to be 120. We have that capacity. Actually, here's an interesting idea. Why do we die at all? Why has natural selection never given us an immortal species? Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I have. I have never reached a conclusion, but I always figured you live long enough, well, especially up until recent history, only long enough to recognize that it was all crazy hustle.
That's a more philosophical. I'm looking for a scientific answer. Here's one answer for why we're not immortal.
Okay.
So if you think about it, why would natural selection not have created a creature that lived forever?
Right.
Wouldn't that be it? Why should we die?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the one answer. It's not known for sure if this is the answer, but this is a good answer. Imagine that there are two different kinds of things that can kill you: intrinsic causes and extrinsic causes. So things inside your body that result in you dying, defects, diseases, and so forth, or things outside your body, like accidents, lightning strikes, trees fall, and you just die, and so forth. Because it's impossible to eliminate all extrinsic causes, because some people are going to die from accidents, it would be inefficient from the point of view of evolution to evolve to be immortal. Because we would have all this capacity to be immortal. We would have these bodies capable of immortality, which let's say would be evolutionarily demanding, like to evolve anything like an eye or a brain or strong, any quality, lactase, right? Like we talked about earlier, you don't have lactase persistence into adulthood because it's not needed. So evolution doesn't waste anything. There'd be no reason for that. So there would be no reason, the argument goes, to evolve immortality, because inevitably some people would be killed eventually by accidents anyway. So unless you can create a world in which there are no accidents, there are no extrinsic causes of death, it would be inefficient from an evolutionary point of view to evolve immortality. So death, the reason we die naturally, some people think, the reason we die naturally is that there are unnatural causes of death in the world, like accidents. If we could eliminate the unnatural causes, so that no time ever were we ever killed by trees falling or lightning strikes or things like that, then actually over time we would evolve to live indefinitely. This is the theory. It's a crazy idea.
It is fascinating, but do you think that nature had that sort of foresight?
Well, it's not a foresight, but that's how natural selection works. Think about, like, if I suddenly magically transformed your body at great expense to make you capable of immortality, and then 2 days from now you're hit by a bus, I've wasted all that effort.
But if you only done it to one person, you wasted that effort. If you did it to other people, you have the potential to create an incredibly wise person with 1,000 years of life and experience and education and learning.
But he also would die. He also would
Perhaps.
die. So everyone eventually would die from these extrinsic causes. So
Perhaps.
well, no, that's the assumption in the model.
Yeah.
If it's not perhaps, if in fact there are no extrinsic, if in fact there is a world in which you're never struck by lightning, never hit by a bus, never a tree branch,
Right.
then the theory is that we would have evolved to be immortal.
So
That's
it's
the
almost
theory.
like the life that you live, you're inevitably going to get killed by extrinsic causes.
Yes.
And if you extend that life to 1,000 years, then it's absolutely going to happen.
Yes. Therefore, why bother?
But that's just living in a bubble, just terrified of the world falling rocks landing
but you
on your
can't.
head.
But you can't transform. You can't take this theory and this model and apply it to an individual in an individual life. It's about how our species evolved. It's not about how you should live your life.